Before we get started, I might point out that you might hear the furnace running in the background. Now, I know studios are supposed to be soundproof, but this studio is really upstairs. It's an office, and it's cold outside, even though we're here in Georgia. Baby, it's cold outside. So the furnace is running to keep the house kind of warm, keep me warm in these Hawaiian shirts. So anyway, if you hear the furnace, that's what it is. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about a Texan musician. But most people, myself included, thought he was English. But no, he came from Texas. Then he moved to San Francisco. Then he moved back to Texas. He's a real Texas cowboy hippie. And his first album had a hit on it, a big hit. And it was called She's About a Mover. And the group was called the Sir Douglas Quintet. Hence why we thought they were English. And the artist is Doug Sahm. So let's head out to those Texas tornadoes and let's drop the needle. Doug Sahm was a local success in high school in San Antonio, Texas. He played multiple instruments and he fronted a number of bands and even recorded some records which were hits in San Antonio. But his music label said, with the invasion of the British and everything the Beatles and British acts, you guys need to style yourself not as Texans, but as a British group. And so that's what they did, and they became the Sir Douglas Quintet. And their first hit, as I said, was She's About a Mover, which was inspired by the Beatles' She's a Woman. The Sir Douglas Quintet had Doug on lead vocals and guitar, Augie Myers on keyboards, Frank Moran on sax, Harvey Kagan on bass, and Johnny Perez on drums. The first album came out in 1966 with the outrageous title of The Best of the Sir Douglas Quintet. But right after the success of the album, a little bit of a disaster struck, and both Doug Sahm and Augie Myers were arrested for marijuana possession in Texas. Now, as soon as Doug's parole officer allowed it, Doug moved out to San Francisco. But Augie's parole officer was not having it, so Augie had to stay behind in Texas. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Doug got the rest of the band back together without Augie, and they started playing around San Francisco, even opening for the Grateful Dead. And in 1968, they released their second album, Sir Douglas Quintet Plus 2, Honky Blues. Finally, in 1969, back in Texas, the parole officer says to Augie, yes, you can go to San Francisco. So he goes out and rejoins with Doug and the rest of the band, and they record their third album, Mendocino, which the title song became a huge international hit. And interestingly, the album also includes a remake of She's About a Mover. In 1970, they recorded two albums, Together After 5 and 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. In 1971, they followed up with the return of Doug Saldana. In 1972, the Sir Douglas Quintet broke up, and Doug Sahm decides he'll go solo. And in 1973, he releases two albums. The first one is Doug Sahm and the Band. The album got tons of publicity as it was Doug's first album since the Sir Douglas Quintet, but in fact, it sold poorly. I like Anybody's Going to San Antone, It's Gonna Be Easy, and the cover of Bob Dylan's Wallflower. His second album, released in 1973, is Texas Tornado. Now, this album is really pretty much made up of outtakes and songs that were left over from his previous album, but it becomes a hit. In 1974, he put out Groover's Paradise. It was a hit in Austin, but nowhere else. And this is the last album of Doug Sahm's that I own, but he continued to record. In 76, he releases Texas Rock for Country Rollers, but it contains no hits and it doesn't sell. Doug gets disgusted with the fact there are no hits and the album's not selling and decides to leave the music business. But in 1980, he comes back and releases an album called Hell of a Spell. Again, there are no hits, but Doug goes out on a national tour. It doesn't help the sales. The album is a commercial failure. But Doug does find success in Europe and Canada, and his next album is called Jukebox Music, and it gets good reviews. The next Doug Sahm album got nominated for a Grammy as Best Traditional Blues Record. It's the last real Texas blues band. But again, it didn't sell. In 1998, he released an album called Get a Life, and it was credited to Doug Sahm, a.k.a. Texas Tornado. But then it was quickly re-released as SDQ 98, as in Sir Douglas Quintet. He recorded his last studio album between the years of 1998 and 1999, but sadly, he died at the age of 58 before the album was finished. So it was released after his death, and the album is called The Return of Wayne Douglas. So Douglas Wayne Sahm had quite a colorful life. He started out in Texas, then he moves to California, becomes a hippie, then he goes back to Texas. He has a couple of hit records, and he keeps making music. So go pull out some Sir Douglas Quintet or Doug's solo albums, particularly listen to the later stuff, which is a really good mix of like Texas music and some Mexican and Cajun all mixed together. It'll definitely keep you rocking. If you like this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.